what drives prosperity is production, not revenues.
Please be seated. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. My name is Soji Apampa, and I'm one of the founders of the Convention on Business Integrity and the Business Action Against Corruption. I would like to call on one of our directors, Dr. Bala Magaji, to welcome you all properly on our behalf. Dr. Magaji.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you to this edition, the fourth edition of Regulatory Conversation. Over the years, we've had, this is the fourth one, if I remember very well. The first Regulatory Conversation was on the CBN, MTN, and the four banks' imposition of fines and the rest by CBN. Then the second one was the one we had on ports and maritime sector reform. The last one we had in Abuja was on the one on the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council on things they're doing. This is the fourth one we are having, as you can see, is on the foreign exchange restrictions on food importation and explication. What are we out to achieve? Basically, the objective here is for us to enlighten ourselves and major actors on the implications, to even have an insightful discussions and robust understanding of the regulatory environment and implications of certain regulatory policies and actions that is being taken by our regulators, so that we can share how corruption seeps into such policies and activities, and how we can avoid, and how we can be able to avoid or mitigate against such corruptive activities. So, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to this event, and hope at the end of the day we'll be able to arrive at a fruitful discussion that will move our regulatory philosophy, improve the quality of regulatory philosophy that we have in this country, so that it can gender development and the rest. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. May I call Mr. Pampa to continue?
Thank you very much, Dr. Magaji. Permit me to stand here, you will see that in the interest of time, we're not going to dwell on protocols. We're going to go straight to the point. I have a presentation that I'm going to make in order to set the scene for this discussion. So according to the central bank, and I'm going to use milk imports as a placeholder for the whole story about food imports and the restriction of foreign exchange for food imports. We've been told that about $1.2 billion is spent annually. Let's say we don't even argue with that figure, and we accept it as the central bank has given. 1.2 billion on forex imports, for dairy imports. There are two schools of thought. Number one, school one, this action by the central bank will lead to dairy companies backwardly integrating their value chains, and that it will improve market access for herdsmen and also reduction in the farmer-herdsman clashes. It also states that there will be creation of more jobs and the foreign exchange being put out by the central bank, at least 1.2 billion will be saved. That's one school of thought. The second school of thought is saying that this action of the central bank is going to lead to accentuated pain for the poor, because there are no palliative measures or remedies that are in sight. And secondly, that it will lead to super profits for special interest groups who are suspected to have captured this sort of regulation. So today is all about debating the two sides. Are we going to get what school of thought A is saying as a result of the CBN action, or are we going to get what school of thought B is saying? Next slide. Okay, on the backward integration story, and I'm going to make it very short. The real story is that milk is being imported into Nigeria, not in liquid form, because liquid form is 88% water. So it's powdered milk that everybody is importing, really. That's the biggest item. In order to have a powdered milk factory in Nigeria, your backward integration must produce 1 million liters of milk a day, minimum, for a modest size powdered milk factory to be sustainable. 1 million liters of milk a day. The best of the milk companies so far that has been working with local producers during the wet season has managed to get up to 70,000 liters. But in the dry season, it has fallen below 20,000 liters. You work it out. With all the backward integration, everything else you will do, when will you get to the 1 million liters that is required in order to make this policy really work? We know that demand for milk in Nigeria is 1.7 billion liters per annum. And we're only producing about 600 million liters of milk per annum, leaving a big demand gap. So you can see where school of thought A is coming from, that there's a need to do something about this huge demand gap. And we see that. Next. But in order to improve market access for the herdsmen, it's not as simple as grass. Ordinary grass will support 1 hectare of ordinary grass, will only support 3 to 4 animals for 1 year. That's the amount of feed they can get from it. But if you used improved fodder, such as Napier grass, you can feed 20 to 25 cows on that 1 hectare for 1 year. So we don't have those high-yielding grasses available everywhere. We're told that Nigeria has about 20 million heads of cattle, which means you need at least 1 million hectares of high-yielding grass to be planted. How many years is this going to take? Let's even suppose that by magic, you are able to get it within 1, 2, 3 years. it still doesn't mean that industry will uptake the milk. Number one, it's in the wrong form. It's liquid. And number two, milk hygiene and milk handling. These are extension services that should have been given to the herdsmen in order to make sure that it's safe quality of milk that can be taken up from the farmers. So our inability to do that also comes from the fact that there is one extension worker from government to 10,000 farmers. It's a ratio of 1 to 10,000. So having a knee-jerk policy that then states that immediately, with immediate effect, we are canceling your ability to get Forex for these things, you start to wonder then that, is it really what is going to lead to this situation? Yes, there will be more jobs for people who will grow the grass. There will be more jobs for people who can teach the herdsmen. There will be more jobs for people who will set up milk aggregation, milk collection centers. Yes, but it still doesn't answer the question that industry is interested in. How soon will we get powdered milk? Because things like Cadbury's Bonvita also includes an element of powdered milk. Same thing for Ovaltine. Same thing for Nestle's Milo. Same thing for Cerelac, and so on. You can't have those, and we don't even have the cold chain to deal with the liquid form of this milk. So what exactly is this policy all about, and who is the main beneficiary? So we're still on School of Thought A. Next one. Then there's the idea of job creation. Yes, I've said it that through pasture production, extension and vet services, milk collection and so on, we can have those jobs, but the higher value jobs will not come until more value is added to the milk. For example, like turning it into powdered milk, which is not a short-term thing. It's not a 1 to 3 year measure. We're talking 5 years and upwards to be able to ramp up the volumes of milk to that level. Next slide. So what about the idea from School of Thought A that since the problem is about reducing the amount of Forex that we're using? Well, I would say that we're not going to really reduce the amount of Forex we'll use. It's the source that will change. And when the source changes, the price goes up. And when the price goes up, who pays? It's the poor. It's the poor that pays. It's the poor consumer who would either pay or decide to go without. So let's look at School of Thought B. School of Thought B is reminding us that Nigeria's population is assumed to be 194 million. 84% of Nigerians live on less than $2 a day. That's our current reality. 54.32 Nigerians are of working age, between ages 15 and 64. The average size of the household of the poor is 9 persons, meaning if you are able to impact one, you could possibly be impacting 9 as well. 70% of the poor live in rural areas, and we know that our rural-urban split is around 50-50 at the moment. So really, we're looking at about 70 million Nigerians who are involved in the rural areas and who are involved in food production. It says 90% of our food production comes from these rural areas, come from these smallholders. Now, they, according to School of Thought A, they are presumed to be the primary beneficiaries of the restriction on foreign exchange. Next slide. But Nigeria today is the highest in Africa, but the second highest in the world country where you have children with stunted growth. Under 5s. 1 out of every 3 children in Nigeria under the age of 5 is stunted. We have 11 million, and that is after India. But India's population is over 1 billion. and they have 44 million children who are stunted. Nigeria, with our small population relative to India, we have 11 million children who are stunted out of our 32, 33 million under fives. And what this does is that as soon as they become stunted, it is irreversible. And it's coming from two sources. Number one is water. Very poor water, sanitation, and hygiene. If they have too many bouts of diarrhea before the age of 2, they become stunted for life. Then the second area is nutrition. Is in the area of food and the kind of food they eat. Next slide. And the FAO tells us that 40% of the body's dry matter is protein. And intake of animal protein in Nigeria is at present 4.8 grams per head per day, as against the recommended 35 grams. So we have a massive protein gap, both for adults and for children. Next. And according to UNICEF, protein energy malnutrition is a common nutritional disorder found in under fives in Nigeria, contributing to stunting and wasting, and increases the risk of infection and leads to many deaths. In Nigeria, up to 70,000 children die a year as a result of this serious malnutrition. Typically, 60 to 80% of the cost of producing the proteins is in the feeds. So agriculture is central to what needs to happen in order for our populations to be more healthy. Next slide. So, but if you look at what School of Thought B is saying, is that there will be super profits for special interests because we have allocative inefficiencies. Subsidy for petroleum products is 12.5 billion this year. And this government had said it was not going to invest in subsidy program, but we have continued the petroleum subsidy up to the tune of 12.5 billion. I wonder how much that is in, that may be approximately about 4 trillion naira that we're spending. Hajj and Jerusalem pilgrims also swallow their own just under 1 billion. The AMCON hole that we're facing is about 18 billion big. $18 billion, 6.5 trillion, and it's owed by the super rich. Tax and import duty waivers to the super rich also came to about 2.8 billion over the period 2011 to 2015. Some of the beneficiaries of waivers and these other exemptions are the same ones who now want to be the big players in food production. The same ones who are the big players in agriculture today. So which way do you think that the policy of the CBN is going to go? Who is going to be the main beneficiary? Is it the poor that are going to carry the extra cost that will come from the companies looking for forex from other sources? Or will it be the super rich who will always get their forex anyway from the central bank at CBN rates? Next slide. Now looking at operational inefficiencies. 11 trillion is what was reportedly lost to corruption in the power sector between 1999 and 2017. 11 trillion naira. Embezzlement and mismanagement, and you don't even need to take my word for it. Why do we have partial closures of our borders at the moment? And what is it doing to the movement of petroleum products? You know that we have really been financing and carrying the burden of smugglers. It's been very highly placed smugglers who have been driving that part of the economy. In 2016 alone, Nigerian officials reportedly collected an estimated 82.3 million bribes, totaling 4.6 billion. That's from a study by UNODC and the Bureau for Statistics. bribe-paying Nigerians spend an average of $28,200. That's about $80 annually. Remember, 84% of Nigerians earn less than $2 a day. So if on average they're paying this much, I just want you to see how much is involved. So who could be the main beneficiary of this CBN policy? Is it, as School of Thought A has said, that it is going to be for the good of the economy, or is it, as is being insinuated by School of Thought B, that perhaps it will be special interests who have the access and have the power to take the most advantage of what is currently happening? So in whose interest do we make regulation? And this will be my final slide for now. Next one. The question we would like to ask ourselves today in this forum is it in the public interest? This choice by the CBN, is it going to be in the public interest? In the short term, in the medium term, in the long term? In whose interest is this policy? The barrage of actions from CBN and other regulators, are they coordinated and mutually supporting? Will rules and standards be applied fairly to all? Are the actions targeted properly at solving problems in ways that minimize unintended consequences? Was communication around the actions open and honest? Will the CBN be accountable, or will it resist this public scrutiny of their actions? Are they prepared to justify the actions? And the CBN approach to regulation, is it flexible enough to keep up with the pace of needs of the affected industries and the development of the nation? I will leave it here, and I will hand over to a very able panel who will discuss the issues in detail. The panel will be chaired by Mr. Femi Awoyemi, who is the chairman of Proshare. A round of applause for him, please. He would like me to announce the panelists, so the panelists should please go on the platform. We have Mr. Muda Yusuf from Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. A round of applause for him, please. We have Mr. Frank Aigbogun, who is the proprietor of Business Day newspapers. We have Ms. Susie Onwuka of Consumer Protection Council. A round of applause for her, please. We have Mr. Oluwasegun Oshidipe of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. And last but not least, Professor Pat Utomi of Center for Values in Leadership. A round of applause for all of them.
Good morning. We'll try to keep to 1 hour. And by way of introduction, when you have esteemed members of this panel here, having to keep them under short 5 minutes responses will be the challenge of my role here. But I'm standing up here so that Professor Tomi can actually understand that I'm actually chairing the session. It's strange, but here is the thing. This is a very, very serious topic. Sometimes people tend to confuse the strategy with the politics, and it's important that we separate it in the form of the conversation. I think CBI also made a strategic choice in making me the moderator so that I cannot express some of my thoughts. By way of summary, therefore, I would like to say the following, and which may serve as a guidance to what Mr. Apampa has presented. One is that governance has never been an easy thing. It may sound strange coming from me, and as such, when you make conversations around a particular policy, it is always good to take it within the larger context of the whole policy. So the challenge for someone like myself, and I've seen, is that, one, I've often not found an ideological direction with which we are talking, so you cannot create a context within which you put particular actions of government in a particular box. Secondly, the principle of forest restriction as a policy, economic policy, is often confused with these particular actions of government. There are classic examples of how forex restrictions have worked in different climes, and we don't need to beat around the bush. It doesn't really make sense if you do not have a broader economic context of it. So for the purposes of this conversation, the diverse members will share with us their perspectives on forex restriction as a policy and the objective of which we want to go. So by way, they will make their presentations for about 5 minutes, and then we can start the dialogue. And on that note, I would like to defer, starting from my left here. Mr. Frank Ivogon, your thoughts.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Femi, thank you very much. I had a small conversation with Prof while we were sitting before being called up to the chair for the panelists, and perhaps you can benefit a little bit from it. And it's about how, in fact, I've advised him. He's a professor, and I've said to him that there's a danger in saying the same thing every year and every time about same problems that never go away in Nigeria, that maybe next time he should speak in Latin, and maybe next year he speaks in Dutch, next year he speaks in Efik, so that those who don't understand might think he's saying different things. But it's really the same thing about the same problem. We have an issue here, and the issue is one where government, or at least the central bank, believes that we should be producing more milk locally. And I think that's just as good. But you would then ask yourself, before you get to the point of seeking to produce more milk locally, are you able to produce more milk locally? Are you able to do it cost effectively? Is that the best way to move the nation forward? Perhaps yes. What I have a problem with, and that for me speaks to the last slide that Soji presented. He asked one question around the communication. Has it been honest? Was there any consultation? Is the policy flexible enough, given that if you were here and you listened to Soji's presentation, we're talking about some very, very vulnerable part of society. He presented data that shows average consumption of protein of around 4.5 grams compared to something like 30 grams for others. And I was telling Prof, that 4.5 is average. There will be many that are below that average. There will be those who don't even consume even a gram in a day. And so we're talking about very vulnerable part of society. Now, when you deal with that kind of people, should you then make policy just, you are angry because some company has made some money bringing in milk, and you say, look, just shut down the borders, shut down everywhere. Is that the way to go about it? My submission is no. I think there should be more consultation. And in the process of the consultation, there should be a consensus that this policy is indeed the right one for Nigeria at this particular time. I believe the policy is not flexible enough. There ought to be a graduation over a number of years. giving people time to make the investment. Because we're talking about private sector investment here. People will need to do feasibility studies. They will need to look at the entire value chain so they can position themselves. They will need to look at things around packaging. They will need to then raise capital. You can't do that. Surely they haven't been given time to do that. And so my submission is, there is a lot that is wrong with this policy. Even if the goal of the objective can be understood, we're going about it in a very wrong way. Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much. Good morning. I said to Soji, he wasn't listening actually, when he was asking me up, I said, I thought I was retired. You know, when you retire, you should just watch. And I thought I should just come and cheer people like Femi, telling us how the world should be ordered. And when Frank and I were sitting out there, I said, oh my goodness, this deja vu is happening too frequently. I mean, I'm just going through. Let me just begin with, what year was 1994? How many years ago was 1994? 25 years ago, 25 full years ago, the Harvard Business School Association of Nigeria started its budget workshop or seminar series. The very first one. I guess, keynote speaker or something. It was at the Sheraton. Abacha had just taken over a few months ago, so the budget was delayed. And the budget finally got announced just 2 days before the designated day of the budget speech. At that time, I was on the National Council of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. Of course, as I was on Muda's council of the Chamber of Commerce and so on and so forth. In the search for what I like to call negative legitimacy, when a government comes to power by a coup d'etat, it needs to gain legitimacy. And one of the ways to gain legitimacy is by saying everything that was done by those before them were wrong. So one of the things that Abacha was going to get rid of was this funny foreign exchange market, which had freed us from incredible things like PPIB. How many of you remember the Prices, Productivities, and Incomes Board? Let me tell you one effect of the PPIB. It set a price for selling motor cars. I used to work in the motor industry. If you look at your cost of foreign exchange, which did not come directly from central bank, as we all knew, invariably worked out that every car you sold, you put a lot of naira in the boot and donated to the person who bought it. So people invented a fairly strange thing. Since you could put a price on a new car, but you couldn't put one in a used car, the biggest business of the company was to generate used cars. Because on Saturday mornings, you auctioned used cars. There was no price limit to used car. And people of their own bid 3 times the price of a brand new car to buy a used car. Now that's the kind of regime that the foreign exchange market saved us from. When Abacha came, he said, we're going to get rid of these funny things Babangida did. So, when he announced that, 2 days before this first budget workshop, my president, the president of MAN, Wakili Adamawa, Hassan Adamu, was on TV praising these wonderful steps of government. Now manufacturers who do more than these traders can get direct allocation and production will go up. I had a strange dilemma going up to speak that morning. So I began by saying, first of all, I have to admit publicly that I'm a member of the National Council of MAN. But I want to say here that MAN will live to regret what our president said on TV yesterday night. It was not 6 months before MAN was begging that he did not want preferential allocation of foreign exchange. That's why when you ask me to speak on these things, I said to Frank, you know, I've been saying I'm retired. I've been around for too long. I need to get out of the way. Let other people be saying these things because I have lived through many of these follies. And to come and talk about it again, I don't think it's fair. I need to just stay and die quietly somewhere. You know, really seriously, part of the problem is that we don't have a national strategy. And when I say this, people say, oh, he has come again. There's been a lot of development debates going on. Two that I find most peculiar, and I subscribe to one of them. Actually, I began to propose that a long time ago, but now it's been captured in structural economics, and people have given it all kinds of names. There used to be a World Bank chief economist in Nigeria, the German chap, what's his name? Anyway, I remember his name, it doesn't matter. He went back to Washington, and the chief economist at the World Bank at that time was this Chinese guy called Justin Lin, who I believe is coming to the Economic Summit next week, or 2 weeks from now. And when Justin Lin was talking about the concept of what is now known as latent comparative advantage, Trekker Vehicle is his name. Trekker said to his boss, there's a guy in Nigeria who's been writing this for forever. The guy's Patutomi. So I exchanged some emails with Justin Lin back then, so like, I don't know how many years ago, when he left Nigeria. And basically, what Justin Lin and the South Korean economist at Cambridge that wrote Good Bad Samaritans, Jeju Chang, have been arguing for some years is about the whole business of protection and infant industries. Essentially what Justin Lin argues, which is what I've argued for years, is if we have a clear national strategy that says, look, we want to become global leaders in this 1, 2, 3, we can do isolated industrial policy to those areas on which our endowments allow us to become competitive globally and to dominate that value chain. We can then say, okay, in these particular industries, we'll protect them in these ways that will lead to these kind of outcomes in X number of years, and then will make us dominant free traders on those value chains. That's what is now called latent comparative advantage in structural economics. If you just say, oh, yeah, okay, we put ban on this, put ban on that, you just get these games on foreign exchange for those who are extracting rent and all kinds of things, and it never eventually gets us quite anywhere. So I think that that's a very important thing to consider in this. The other point I think that is critical to make is that I have argued for a long time that the biggest risk to doing business in Nigeria is regulatory risk. A regulator is more likely to kill a company than any market risk is likely to do in Nigeria. I'm on record, I can prove it. I'm giving a paper on that in Rome next month. Regulatory risk is the biggest risk of doing business in Nigeria. I can show systematically sectors of economy that have been wiped out by an unthinking regulator acting. Wow. The truth is that it is in the nature of the African. I sit on the Africa board of 1 or 2 companies that are involved in looking at the whole continent. It's not a Nigerian problem peculiarly, but it's worse in Nigeria than perhaps anywhere else on the continent. The African, if you give him a uniform, you give him authority, immediately becomes a bully. So the exercise of his power comes from he's showing you that he's the one in charge. And so he doesn't go way out of his way to think in terms of the big economic picture. What is the consequence of this, my exercising this authority? And that is a big problem for us. And that is why I came to this meeting to say, part of our duty as players in this is to say to ourselves, look, this economy belongs to all of us. Can we begin to educate each other on the consequence? Most of my academic work has been on institutions and economic performance. And for me, Douglas North's 1990 book remains the definitive work on institutions. Institutions evolve out of the interested parties engaging. It is not because we've decreed central bank into existence. So that's an institution. It doesn't exist. It's how all of us play in engaging the central bank that leads to the evolution of norms that set boundaries to conduct. which is what institutions are. So we cannot all be pointing fingers if we don't play a role, if we don't step up and say, hey, no, you can't do that. We all were here. I'm sorry to go back to this example because it would look almost personal, but in a piece I wrote a couple of weeks ago, I stated it clearly. Banking. We saw central bank wake up and halve the value of the Nigerian banking system one morning by a decision they didn't think through. Most of us were cheering, we were clapping. We didn't even think through it ourselves. I heard this statement from the Pricewaterhouse consultant at Wharton. Said Nigerian people are very strange people. They wake up one morning without anybody putting up under pressure, they halve the value of the banking system. That system that was growing, moving into Africa, taking over African banking, suddenly was available to be picked and plucked by anybody who looked here. So we have that challenge that we all must. While all of this was going on, who spoke up? Nobody. Because we are all afraid of the bully. Maybe he will get to us. If we can protect, just lie low enough, we will survive. And in the end, it's like the Reverend Martin Niemöller. First they came for, I guess, the communists and said, those communists. Then they came for the Jews. Thank God I'm not a Jew. Then they came for the Catholics. Thank God I'm an Anglican. And when they finally came for me, there was no one left to speak of. That is part of the challenge of elite engagement. So if you can go through this, I can tell you, even well-meaning policymakers make policies that can damage the economy because of the conversation. EDL, the Essential Drugs List. The World Health Organization worked up an essential drugs list of generics. It says government is spending too much money paying for Panadol in hospitals when it can buy paracetamol, generic. Panadol will make headache go away in 5 minutes. The generic paracetamol will make it go away in 15 minutes. Why do we want to spend so much money paying for the branding of Panadol, which is mainly what we do? So let government hospitals use an essential drugs list for their purchases. Policy. Came under a very nice man, Olikoye Ransom Kuti, who was socialistic in his orientation, and he and his friends, without consulting anybody, sat down and decided that, look, we ban Panadol. Technically speaking, they didn't ban Panadol. But they basically woke up one morning and killed the pharmaceutical industry in Nigeria. But the law was a minimum list, not a maximum list. Now, these things have happened so frequently in Nigeria that when they happen and we're all looking, I think, what's wrong with us? That's why I'm in retirement. Nobody should call me again. No. I'm going to my village.
Just for the records, not all of us kept quiet. Muda, we actually, and in fact, His Excellency, now His Excellency, was actually called the bull in the China shop, if you recall. Muda.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just as Prof said, the regulatory environment is one of the biggest challenges that we face currently in business. Surely, I have a feeling that the regulators mean well. I think they mean well. Because all of this is coming under the ambit of the new wave of economic nationalism. We want to grow what we eat, wear what we sow, do all sorts of things. It's a good intention, it's a noble objective. But the difference is in the strategy. How do we achieve it? Unfortunately, we don't have regulators or those in government who actually listen or engage so that we can have the right kind of strategy that can achieve the same result. That is a big challenge. Unfortunately, the CBN is not here. Ideally, the CBN should have been on this panel so that you can have, although Soji has presented what is supposed to be the CBN school of thought, but it would have been nice for them to be here. There are too many regulations because this is about milk. But actually, the bigger issue is the quality of the regulatory environment and the damage it is doing to this economy. What we have seen is that, this is a platform of Convention for Business Integrity. To do business with integrity in Nigeria today is a tall order. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. I know many businesses that have gone under because of the challenges of regulatory compliance. And many businesses have, transited or become informal sector players. Because when we have this kind of regulatory environment, what happens is that you shrink those who are doing business ethically, they begin to go extinct, and you expand the scope of the informal sector, where there are no rules, no tax, nothing is paid, no compliance with any regulation. That is what is happening. And unfortunately, we don't seem to even learn from the failure of this kind of model of economic management. We have gone through this with our textile industry over several decades. We banned textile, we increased the tariff, we gave them intervention fund. Our members of Federal Executive Council were wearing made in Nigerian clothes, all of that. But did that revive the textile industries? No. Because we have not addressed the fundamentals. Today, fairly used clothes is on import prohibition list. And yet we have very vibrant market. Very big market of fairly used clothes. So much so that when some of ladies, when they even put on some of this, you don't even know that they are fairly used. Of course, from the point of dignity of the human being, it's not a good thing to be wearing clothes that are second-hand. But we have a reality that we have to face. We have the reality of poverty, we have the reality of what people can afford and reasonably also look good. So rather than deal with the fundamentals of creating an environment that will make it possible for us to produce things and produce competitively, we are not addressing that. Rather than address the causes, we are fighting the symptoms. And these things won't go away. So we have a responsibility to continue to engage the authorities. And we have also the challenge of the quality of our institutions. Just as Prof said, institutions are very key. First, to the quality of policies that you come up with. Second, to the way you also manage the system, the way you implement the policies. So these are issues. On the milk thing, well, we have said it several. It's not just about milk. We have the oil palm, the palm produce or oil palm, crude palm oil, which was put under import prohibition. We have some investors who have invested billions of naira refining crude palm oil. Suddenly, this policy came and the business went under. And this business also was a beneficiary of the CBN intervention fund, unfortunately. Now we say we can produce it locally. What has happened? The smugglers have taken over the business. So all the people who are doing legitimate business, who are paying huge tax to government, generating jobs, all these people have been driven out of business, and the smugglers have taken over. And the bulk of the non-oil revenue that government gets, over 80% of this come from these formal sector players. These are the people paying the tax. Now, if you wipe out the dairy industry and you hand over the sector to the herdsmen, how much revenue are you going to get from herdsmen? What is the quality of jobs that they will create? And of course, the smugglers will fill the gap. It's only a matter of time. Smugglers don't pay tax. If they are not regulated, they bring in all sorts of things. The same thing is happening with rice, unfortunately, with all the celebration that we are now self-sufficient in rice. Why did we now have to go and close the border? It's a contradiction. So the emphasis should be on building domestic capacity, on enriching the quality of policy, because we are talking about self-reliance. The CBN is busy intervening in the market to strengthen the naira. Is that itself not a contradiction? We have spent close to 2 billion trying to strengthen the naira. The stronger the naira, the more the incentive for people to go and import. And the more you penalize local production. So even from the foreign exchange management point of view, you will have issues fundamentally. So, let me just yield and again on the industrial policy before I drop. You see, we have a major challenge also with the structure of our industrial sector. Many of the players in the sector are dependent on foreign imports as even the final, those who are importing finished goods. That itself is a major problem. Because we are coming from a regime of import substitution strategy, which is a highly import-dependent strategy of industrialization. We were able to do that at the time when we had a lot of forex. So that itself was fundamentally defective from the beginning. If you look at the foreign exchange allocation list and all of that, huge sums also go into importation of raw materials. But you cannot stop that overnight. This is a defective structure that has evolved over time. Because the best way to industrialize is to depend on what you call resource-driven industrialization. It is your resources that should give a pointer to the kind of emphasis, the kind of industries that you should be focusing on. Now we say we want to manufacture vehicles. We introduce the auto policy. We raise the tariff from about 25 to 70%. How many Nigerian-made cars have we seen? Now we have over 50 registered assembly companies just to be able to extract one concession or the other. Meanwhile, there's a whole massive smuggling of vehicles going on. These are very simple things to see. So let me stop there and allow others to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Susie?
Good morning, all. Yeah, the earlier speakers, they've all spoken on the negative side of the policy. I am a regulatory body, so I'll be looking at talking on the regulatory aspect. Yes, the policy might look bad because of the effects, and maybe it was not properly engaging with the sectors that were concerned. But like the speaker next to me said, most government policies are to actually move the country forward and maybe make the country a better place for everybody. But it's in the implementation that we normally have issues. It might be too sudden, yes, but there's hardly any time that a policy will come out that is not too sudden. Most of the companies involved have been producing in Nigeria for so long, and maybe because they know they can just get foreign exchange for these imports, they never ever intend or even look at doing something different. The government coming up with such policies is expecting these companies at least to start looking at this backward integration and start producing things within the country. Yes, we make a lot of noise, there's no infrastructure, there's no this, there's no that, there's no that. Even if something drastic, because Nigeria, if something drastic don't happen, really we don't look back. When it's easy, we just want to keep doing it that way, that way, that way, that way. It's bad, yes, in the short term, there might be pains. But if truly the players in the industry can just take it up as a challenge, I'm sure years forward, we might be saying something different. The Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Council, Commission, has been set up to protect consumer and also to ensure that the business environment is competitive. We have a mandate to advise the government on national policies and how it affects consumers. So with this policy, the commission is a new body. With the policy, we intend to see how it affects the consumers and also the competitive environment in the business sector, and also make reports, because that is one of our mandates, to make annual reports on these things to the government for to let them know the implication on the consumers. That would be my addition for this.
Thank you very much. Shegun.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be with us at this very important platform for conversation on the foreign exchange policy, current foreign exchange policy of government with respect to imports of food items. I need to say quickly that previous speakers have spoken extensively about critical issues that need to be mentioned. But suffice to say that the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria, the body that I represent, our position is that the policy, as good as it seems, it's not properly crafted and is devoid of effective consultation with the stakeholders. What do I mean by that? The proper thing to do, a regulator should do, is before you go into introducing a policy, there is need to look at those that the policy will affect and create a platform for constructive engagement with them, so that in the long run, together, you can plan, put in place an implementation roadmap that will enable you to effectively implement the policy. I give you a good example. The CBN list of 41 items that came, it wasn't really just 41 items. If the CBN had had the opportunity of consulting with the private sector, you will have known that what they call 41 items were 685 tariff-lined items. And we are yet, the manufacturing sector is yet to recover from the impact of that policy. You look at that policy in particular, that 41 items, later they've added fertilizer to it. But if you pick the case of tomato, for example, which is another food item on that list, you understand that they didn't think through the process before going ahead to introduce it. Because when you talk about tomato production, you need to look at the land mass that you have. What's the size that you are cultivating currently? What is the species that you can, effectively cultivate that will produce large concentrate? Because the species we have in Nigeria, you have predominantly water. And when you don't think through, the long and short of it is that the policy will be faulty. And there are people, hawks, I call them hawks, waiting at the sideline to take advantage of the lacuna or the lapses in the policy. Going straight to focusing on the milk production. If you look at milk production as it is, what are the 7 basic conditions that must be in place for you to be able to have a profitable and commercial production of milk? Number 1, the weather. You can only produce milk effectively commercial quantity in the temperate, where you have temperate regions. When you look at our weather, you can only point to maybe 2 locations in the nation that actually can fit somewhat to that. Number 2 condition is the kind of cattle house that you build. We are no longer in the Stone Ages. Now the cattle houses are standard cattle houses. They have clean water. They have specialized, feed. We are not talking of just grasses now. They have silages, a combination of soya beans, grains, so that these cattle will be able to produce maximum milk for production. Number 3 is the quality and quantity of the feed. Do we have that? The answer is no. For a typical cow, to produce, large gallons of milk that will enable you to even break even, talk less of making profit. You need to feed that cow with almost a little over 100 tons of feed. What about the cost of that? That takes me to number 4. Milk production requires large capital outlay. What I mean, I've mentioned some of these large capital outlay for production. And you can't just wake up one morning and say, cancel it and start. Because you need to do a lot. Previous speaker has spoken about conducting feasibility, getting land. We know the houses you need to go through to even get your CFO, talk less of all of that. And that takes a long time. The other is the species of cow. We have only 2 types that we can even, when you talk about species of cows that can produce maximum, commercial quantity, the kind of milk that you need for commercial production. There are about 8 of them. And you don't just pick any cow. There are some that they produce not milk, only milk. Because if you're a manufacturer, you don't look for just the one that will give you milk. You also look for those that on the value chain, you can also get cheese from. So, do we have that species here? The answer is no. The 2 they are pointing to, they are producing just 4.5 kilograms of milk per day. When the species that you require as a manufacturer will need to produce at least nothing less than between 30 and 32 kg per day for you to be able to make any sense of the production. So from the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria perspective, the policy, the intention may seem good. All the things, justifications they are putting forward, they look sweet. They may, let me not sound like a Thomas. They will be they are achievable possibly, maybe in the long run. I'm rounding up now. In the long run, but in the short run, we can't achieve that. And our position is that government should immediately put in place a structured platform for engagement with stakeholders, not inviting individual company one-on-one, but a structured platform where stakeholders will sit down and analyze, explain the whole process, and they agree. Finally, before I drop the mic, we have done it before in this nation. What made Nigeria a net exporter of cement today and a major manufacturer of different variants of fruit juice is a policy of this nature. Government just came and said in the next 5 years, you can bring bulk, cement in bulk, but you must endeavor to set up your own plant, stop baggaging because we will not allow you to import again. And look at where we are today. I think I would like to drop my mic here.
It is now time to have the real conversations. If you took the makeup and the lipstick off and removed the wig, the person in front of you may not be as you initially saw it. And so we would like to do with this policy that same way. I will piggyback on what Shegun left off with and say this very carefully so that you'll be ready for the questions. And Madam CPC, I think Irukero is doing a good job, but we won't be here to defend anything. Let's just have this conversation. See, stripped of all the pretenses, the only business in this country is FX. You can describe it, package it in different ways. Everybody is. And so why is FX so interested? It's because of the arbitrary opportunity that is there. And once you have that condition, the rest of the things is like musical chairs. So it's like rearranging a deck of chairs on the beach. You just move them from one location to the other. It's still facing the ocean. And that's where we are today. Because if we're really talking about food self-sufficiency, it is an admirable thing, but the mechanics and the economics of it is a different thing altogether. And it goes to what Professor Tommy said. Without a national strategy, what you are doing is that if you have this group on this table come to you, you will make a policy that suits them. If that other group comes to you tomorrow, you make a policy that suits them. So what you end up doing is not actually managing the economy, but playing politics. And so that's what we've been doing as a country. And so every one of us here, we are part of it. Newspaper proprietors of association, we need something around their prints, they will go to CBN, CBN will do it. To the extent that the central bank today is overcrowded the credit space. Rather than the lender of last resort, is the lender of the first visit. And so once you find such an amorphous system, you will be blind not to see that there are advantages which certain people are building. And I'll use this example for you, because I really want people to leave the window dressing and let's have real conversations. There's no way you're going to fight corruption when you are celebrating the building of a whole building dedicated for people who are fighting corruption. That means it's not going away anytime soon. AFCC just launched a whole building and you celebrated it. Obviously, they will be busy for the rest of the next 30 years. And as such, that is how we pass policy. We create institutions that makes that thing a permanent feature of the body. And that is exactly what we have done here. So strip of all the nice languages that's been used here, what has happened here is a certain interest group was needed to be taken care of. A policy was passed, money will be moved, it will die a natural death, whether we like it or not, but then there will be unintended consequences we'll all have to deal with. So if it is true that the second point also, which is about dealing with the truth, because we are technically insolvent as a nation. We are technically insolvent. Quote me. I produce data. So in God I trust, every other thing is data. We are technically insolvent as a country. And as such, what you see, which you call informed responses, is actually reaction. And whether some of them are good, it's like a dice. You never can show which side we turn out to. But the truth of the matter is that saving FX becomes a natural objective of government. But if it is true that the objective is actually saving FX, then the numbers that Soji put up should be what you should focus on. And as such, I can give you more of the numbers. He gave numbers around pilgrimage. He gave numbers around subsidy. What he did not give you is to give you numbers around generators. In fact, I think it's Business Day who wrote yesterday about the fact that Nigeria, you only have 9 hours a day. And that the rest, everybody is using generator, including the President of the Federal Republic. When you look at your budget and you see a country planning for generator as a budget item, both as a capex and as an opex, then whatever policy you are making in terms of energy is speculative. You've already planned the expenses to buy generators, so you are not solving the energy problem. Because if you wanted to, you would then make it a transitionary thing. So it's the same thing here. So, Prof, Shegun has forced me to talk. And I will say it, to be honest with you, because the mistake we make is to understand that people are making money. Have you passed your neighborhood and seen some houses closed? No, people are making money. No matter how bad an economy is, people are making money. So let us try and help ourselves and stop playing the sympathy or victim game. If any of you had an opportunity to sit down with the CBN governor on this policy, how would the conversation go? Starting with you, Shegun.
Well, my conversation, even though I'm here to represent an association, but I'll just share my thoughts. Yeah, because you said your. My thoughts, if I have the opportunity of sitting down with the CBN governor to talk on this particular issue, my conversation will be around the need to maintain the status quo. That is, to keep the policy on hold, allow stakeholders to sit with the CBN.
Which policy are they putting on hold?
We're talking about the forex policy with respect to the food imports, to keep it, particularly for milk, because our focus is on milk production, to keep it on hold, sit down with the players and plan.
But here's the question you haven't explained.
Okay, what's the question?
If the government just restricts access to his FX, which is at 360, right? And you find that there's a convergence between the CBN and the parallel markets rate. So what is it really people are losing?
No, it's natural. I think in the first presentation...
No. What is it? I mean, what is it people are losing? Because
the natural thing is that people will source, because the policy, I don't think the policy ban
that's what I'm saying.
So they will source from the parallel market, and because of the premium between, there will be more pressure.
Okay, you see, that's the real thing. You see, as much as, I've said everything I needed to say about the economy and the CBN, but here are the practical lessons. Muda, can you help out here? Where is that gap that we are talking about? Because that policy is only going to cost maybe within the band of 5 naira differential.
No, you see, the policy on this forex restriction technically is a ban on importation. And this is part of the policy confusion that we face. Many banks, any item on that list, if you take your form to they will say they won't touch it. They will tell you they can't touch it. They don't want any problem with the Central Bank of Nigeria. That is the reality.
So
we now have a situation where trade policy matters have now moved almost entirely to the Central Bank of Nigeria.
This is the
if you talk to the customs, they will tell you it's not under import prohibition. But how do you process your documents? If within the banking system you cannot process your documentation for FX. And God help you, even if you manage to go through the banks, there's a query waiting for you to come and explain where you got the FX from. It's a major problem. And it's causing a whole lot of disruption in the economy. Nobody wants to be visited every now and then by the EFCC. There's been a lot of intimidation even by the CBN. That they're going to send the EFCC after you have to explain where you got your forest, you have to, all sorts of issues. So the thing to do is for the CBN to get out of the way and face its core function. Monetary stability. And all of that.
Okay.
And allow this foreign exchange to also allow the market to drive the process. If you have a situation where the foreign exchange market is allowed to function in accordance with strict market principles, even the need for this intervention will be minimal. Because the market will run on its own. And we have an economy that will be self-adjusting. Not this that you have so many different kind of exchange rates. There's so much money coming to the CBN on account of that. A lot of people are now queuing before the CBN to get allocation, even governors. You know, just because there is so much in the kitty. I mean, you can't run an economy that way.
So the game is a game of FX.
It's a game of FX, and we should let it go. Let the market function.
Excellent.
That is the way to go. We
have
have a tariff book.
The
tariff book is a 7-year document. There's a reason for it. It's for stability of trade policy. That's why we have a tariff book. But all that we have jettisoned it. We now have a situation where the CBN is telling us that even more items will come on the list. So you don't know which company will be the next. We don't run an economy that way. If you want to really create jobs and really deal with this issue of poverty, we don't run an economy that way.
Muda, thank you. That's actually, you just got a Chris. Frank, let's take it this way. There is a purpose for having that HS code in the first place. There is a fundamental assumption about running an economy that says that since your expectation of income is naturally tied from taxes, you then look at the whole activities within the economy, and especially your trade policy, and then you define your HS codes, and then you fix your tariff structure in there. So anytime you want to adjust your revenue structure, it is to look at those tariff structures and then adjust it. And then you use the levers of that tariff structure to either promote, or sometimes you use it even for economic, sovereign economic challenges, strategy. How do we get back to that to help businesses? Because let's be honest, I think it was Muda who kept on saying this, and Shegun, and I think Prof also made a point. People who are trying to run legitimate businesses are being driven out of the market space every day. And so what you will have is that we have a cowboys market. And so everybody will do whatever is necessary to get by. Because nobody is going to fold his arms and allow his business to collapse. And so we've created what we call a black economy within the whole economy itself. How do you see this from your own viewpoint?
I think the problem we have is, and someone has alluded to it here, we are in deep trouble as a nation. I was speaking with someone in packaging last week, and he works for many of the large conglomerates. And he told me that demand is almost 40% down. So if you are taking 40% less of the packaging you took last year, it means that you are selling less, 40% less than what you sold last year. I mean, that can be a good barometer. Some in government appreciate this quagmire. But the response to it, for me, is where we have a problem. You have a tariff book. And the point has been made already. The reason for that is so you can get a sense of where the government wants the economy to go. And you look at it and plan your investment accordingly. Today, what the CBN does, in effect, says to us, forget the tariff book.
Correct.
As often as we choose, we will promulgate rules that totally render the tariff book ineffective. The CBN, at least in my own experience in Nigeria, is not programmed to deal with tariff, importation, and exportation. That's not its business at all. It doesn't have the capacity, nor does it have the inclination. But as I said earlier, in dealing with the economic quagmire that we are in, we wake up one morning and we hit in one direction. Tomorrow we wake up, we hit in another direction. We're creating more problems than solving issues. You have a situation today where the fiscal authorities are virtually, I don't know whether it is deliberate. You know, we have had consecutively ministers who have been appointed that have just voluntarily vacated the space for the central bank. It's my goodness, I can't think of it. CBN is now the only executive authority in Nigeria today. And it turns out that they are the only ones with money anyway. Maybe the other ones are so pauperized that they too have become candidates for CBN legees. Yes, that's it. That's what we're seeing. The CBN is getting more powerful, and then the fiscal authorities are getting less and less powerful. And so you have this paradox. So where do you go from here? One of the things that I've enjoyed as a journalist at my level, and I will just give you this secret, is when I see public officers in government dancing around. If I'm close enough to them and I feel outraged by what they are doing, you know what I always ask them? When you retire, I'd like to have tea with you. And I've had opportunities of having such meetings with 5 very senior former government officers. In fact, one of them was speaking at the Nigerian Economic Summit in Abuja. He was an executive director in NNPC. He went, lashed everybody. 6 months after he finished, we had tea, and he said he wanted to offer to write for Business Day. And I said, what do you want to write? He said, the nonsense they are doing. And I said, what nonsense have you seen now? Because he's trying now to live as a private person. He's working on his business without the cover of being in that place where he gave contracts to himself as often as he wanted. Now he has to stay on the queue like the rest of us. And he's now complaining and he wants to write a column. When they are in government, I tell you, I understand the idea that, when you're in government, you tend to see things more than others see, but that doesn't explain it at all. They are so overprotected that they have what they do has absolutely no bearing with reality. And I think for me, that's a big problem. We need to have a conversation. So I like Shegun's idea of an engaging platform. But I don't think it's all about milk. Shouldn't be all about milk. Prof has already said it, the absence of a national strategy. You want to ban milk, that's fine. You want us to produce milk locally, that's fine. You must ask the question, the cow that we have here, can they produce milk? If we have the species that can produce milk, are we catering for them in the way that they can produce milk? Because I'm aware, for instance, of statistics that shows a clear divergence between the cow that is kept in a ranch and the one that is harassing us even on highways. The volume of milk that they produce, completely different. Soji has done some work around Napier grass, for instance, and how much difference it makes if you can feed your cattle with Napier grass consistently, and how the yields transform from time to time. So we need to ask ourselves simple questions like that. And then, of course, people who are in this business today, they employ Nigerians. They are producing milk for the less. I'm sure some of us here will always buy milk wherever. Maybe put it in your, these days when you're traveling, you're entitled to 1 or 2 boxes. Put milk in one, and you can put your clothes in another one and come back from your travel. So you can, but there are those who don't have that opportunity at all. Does this policy, madam, does this policy in any way factor in such people? Does it cater for their vulnerability? Or this is just simply a knee-jerk response to our failure in properly managing our foreign exchange resources? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Prof, I would like to piggyback on Frank's, well, I'm used to it now, his usual frankness. Here's the thing. You all remember when we had this cattle disease, avian flu, and all these things? Common sense would naturally dictate that people do not move animals for health and safety reasons. You move products. The first challenge about moving products is you need cold rooms. The next challenge with cold rooms is you need power. The next challenge about power is a generator cannot solve the whole problem. And so you find that you are in a cyclical orbit of inefficiency. It seems, and this is my question, that we have adopted chaos as an economic strategy. Because the opportunities you see often only arise from chaotic situations. If you take a look across all the spectrum of our economic activities, you find out that there is and I think this is my thesis the last time I was here, is that there is an unspoken behavioral trait that if you don't shout, nobody hears you. Nobody talks about you. You have to shout. You have to create drama. You see it at the executive level. You see it at the legislative level. You see it at the judiciary. You see it in our financial markets. You see it amongst the media as well. How do we begin to I mean, looking at this policy, and you said one key point. You said the regulator as a bully. I have taken a look in our own financial markets, and I've seen that the best example I've seen about regulatory, market-led regulation came from the DMO. And it happened in the DMO because there was always constant conversations. Abraham Wanko led DMO. He was always discussing with the operators. And if you've seen that market, in the midst of the chaos in this country, that's a positive example for you. It is calm. They don't have to spend money to buy communications, to do whatever, because they're always consistently engaging with the operators. And they've been able to move their market, and it is growing astronomically. So you see that pocket of positive development in this madness. How, therefore, do we address this question of the regulator as a bully? And especially, you can then piggyback to this particular question. So where do we take it back to? Thank you, sir. Okay. You can use this. Yeah. If nobody wants to.
You know, yeah, well, I told you I've retired. I'll keep repeating this, my retirement business, until I'm allowed to go to my village and rest. You see, you're all looking for my trouble. In church, Godwin Emefiele always sits right in front of me. So you want me to say something here and he turns back and says, bros, wait till I do you. But seriously, you know, we must try and understand the meaning of trade and why international trade is what has led to the prosperity of nations. The fundamental concept of international trade is comparative advantage. Nobody can produce everything as well. So you take what you know how to do, produce it so well, exchange with somebody who can do something else better. You will prosper, he will prosper. That is the very basic concept of trade. We just somehow seem to neglect that fundamental of trade. Now, in defense of Godwin Emefiele, I think part of the problem is that at a point in time, the fiscal side abdicated completely. So CBN had to begin to struggle to do fiscal policy. And they then got confused and got lost. They need to retreat and say to themselves, government, I beg, do fiscal policy. Because right now, there isn't a fiscal policy side, which is creating a problem with people who should be focusing on monetary policy. Now, if this is put in context, again, of a basic strategy, I look at the debate going on want to raise taxes. Minister fellow was discussing last Sunday or so with bishops. I was present, and he was saying the problem is we're not. Jonathan spent all the money. There's no money, so we have to raise taxes and raise. And I thought to myself, oh boy, what drives prosperity is production, not revenues. Okay, Nigeria is not producing, and I give an example all the time about revenues. Revenues can make poor. And my easiest example is we look at a part of our country which used to do a lot, the northern part of our country. Okay? In the fiscal arrangements in this country, before 1976, local governments didn't matter. You could create as many local governments as you wanted. It was an administrative convenience. The north had much fewer local governments than the south. It was a simple choice of administration. Then, 75, 76, the Obasanjo administration goes through this process of learning from the Brazilians and somewhere Eastern Europe. We now have 3 levels of government in this fiscal transfer arrangement. Now, a lot of money is going to local governments. Suddenly, local governments ballooned in the country to 774, which about 500 are in the northern part of our country. But guess what? As more revenues have gone to the north has become poorer. The point, and I was giving an example somewhere, what is called the lottery effect by some economists. If you look at a person who won the lottery 10 years after, a poor person who won the lottery 10 years after, they're usually much poorer than they were when they won the lottery. Somebody said, I'll give you a current example. I said, which one? He said, there's a Nigerian in London. I don't know how many of you know the story. She was living in, what's this place Nigerians live? Peckham. And she won 30 million pounds in the lottery. First of all, her pastor moves in, collects tithes. Then all the people in church, with problems in the church, begin to move in. Then she moves to St. John's Woods. 3.5 years later, she's back in Peckham. You know, so we've got to recognize that revenues don't create wealth. What creates wealth is production. How do we drive production if our strategy is not a sustainable one? But these things of fiddling with foreign exchange and co, never sustainable, which is the point I made in my opening when Hassan Adamu made those comments. Within 6 months, man was begging that he didn't want what he'd asked for. So, can we sit down? The problem of our country is a loss of institutional memory. Like I say, we've gone through all of these things before. See, textiles. Somebody mentioned textiles. Muda, I think it was you mentioned textiles. We went through all these things in textiles. An Indian who had a factory here in Isolo packed up created his machines, moved to Kenya. Today, this guy is making like 10,000 pieces of blue jeans a day for Walmart from Kenya. He used to be in Isolo here. Think of the number of jobs, taxes, and all of these things Nigeria has lost because we are not clear where we want to go as a country. You go to another industry, not textiles, that this has been wheat. In fact, this example reminds me of the great wheat story. And this, I'll give you one really fascinating thing that captures it. President Ibrahim Babangida was going to commission the Bendel feed and flour mills in Ewu, I think in August 1986. On his way to the event, he used his pencil to write in something that was not in his speech. And that thing is that from the 1st of January 1987, there will be a ban on importation of wheat into the country, which was technically pronouncing the death sentence of what he was commissioning. But there's a long story about how we got there. I won't be able to tell that because I wrote a case study on this whole thing, and then I invited Babatunde Amosu, the late Amosu, who was the MD of Flour Mills of Nigeria, to come to the class the day we discussed the case. And this particular part of it, which I didn't know, was supplied by Amosu. Anyhow, because of some, we talked about waivers earlier, somebody mentioned waivers. You know, some powerful general, his friends had approached him for a waiver to bring in flour. There was a ban on importation of wheat, of flour, but to bring in wheat. And he promised them he will get it. They shipped wheat, flour, towards the country, waiting to enter Nigerian waters. But the guy tried to, flour milling industry went and protested to the then head of state. And he warned the Ministry of Trade people that if there's any waiver given, they will end up in Barbage. You know, those days we used to execute in the Barbage. So they didn't dare then get the approval. So when the friends waited, they went back. A few months later, the person whose friends were the ones who became head of state. And according to Amosu, that was his revenge on the flour milling industry. But here's really the point of that whole thing. We went through that sequence, and eventually we unbanned after so much damage had been done in the system. Why I tell this story is that one day I came to visit the then Vice President, Admiral Augustus Aikomu. And it was news time. Somebody else visiting him was the then governor of Rivers State, Ernest Adeleye, Air Commodore, whatever his rank. He was group captain also then. So here is Aikomu, Vice President of Nigeria. Here is the governor of Rivers State and myself. We're watching the network news, and NTA is reporting Aikomu's visit to a farm in Kaduna, a wheat farm. You know, government was allocating money to all the states that said they could produce wheat. So it became a new scam. Every governor was coming to get allocation for wheat. So as the NTA panned over this vast, the whole of Nigeria or Kaduna State had become one wheat farm, talking about the improvement in wheat production, Aikomu himself laid back and said, "Kai, with a life for this country." Oh. And it is the ultimate. I wish I captured that scene. He was the man, he was the one being reported. And we laughed. But this was even more funny. Because when we started, it was Kaduna that could produce wheat. Then he moved to Benue. Then he moved, more governors could produce wheat. Here's Ernest Adeleye inside water in Rivers State. He said, Ernest Adeleye says to Aikomu, "Okay, which will serve if you produce wheat for Port." A country must stop going through jokes like this. And that's really, you know, we need to sit down as a people, because it's the future of all our children that's involved, and say to ourselves, let's stop fooling ourselves. It is not by accident that you go to TCAD and everybody wants to invest but in Ghana. Who is in Ghana that will buy what they're producing? They're producing to sell to Nigeria. So let's get real. Let's get serious.
Before I start taking questions, as a matter of roundup, I'm going to go back to Susie and give, in order to be fair. There was a company called, or there is a company called Multitrex. Since we're in the storytelling phase now, I might add one. I believe it was President Obasanjo who commissioned Multitrex to produce cocoa produce. Because they realized that virtually every single thing that we've been doing, the byproducts out of the cocoa is also important, shea butter, whatever. And because there's been a history about Nigeria and the value chain in cocoa production and shea butter production, everybody remembers Lad Group, which ended up being failed. Then Stama Cocoa, which are not different. Then for those of you who may remember, Ebu Industries, who also went down on policies like that. So these guys decided to invest, and they were earning huge foreign exchange. So they decided to move to about 100,000 metric tons. So they brought Jonathan now to commission the major new plants, which they've increased. Around the same time, maybe about 6 or so months later, the company had to close down because AMCON stepped in. AMCON stepped in because they said they were owing. Facts available, it was that they were not owing. The Sky Bank then had decided to classify their long-term loans and brought it into a short-term period without discussing with the company. And as such, they ended up being with AMCON. And guess what? They did not know they were even with AMCON until about 6 months later when they tried getting a facility. Point of the story was this. After this evidence was presented to the central bank, they said, we have passed a law that if you are with AMCON, you can't get credit anymore. And as such, that company, a listed entity, has been moribund for the past 5 years. If you were really serious about generating FX, that's your FX. If you were really serious about creating jobs, that's your job. If you're really serious about promoting manufacturing, that's your backward integration. It is obvious, therefore, on the face of it is there. How does a Consumer Protection Council help such a business, therefore?
You're not being fair to her.
I'll give her a chance to answer. That's the last question.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, such a business.
The reason why I ask is I see a lot of activity. I see something that's also happened. You have also, the right word is evolved, and your mandate has changed. You would imagine that your mandate is, in fact, you are one of the most powerful institutions in the country now. And I would like to be in your good books, and I hope every other person will be. Because right now, you are set up to be able to focus on distribution companies. You are set up to be able to go virtual everywhere. Now, at least the whole intent of the Consumer Protection Council under this kind of a business, whereby you therefore pass, regulations come, and people are thrown out of business or affect their whole thing. How do they go back to you, or what role do you play in that regard?
The intention is not to throw out people out of business. The intention is actually to enhance the economy. But if that is why there is a provision for looking at the effects of these policies in the different sectors, the government know that there will be issues and actually want to protect the consumers, because the ultimate people that will suffer are the consumers. So the commission is supposed to look at how this market play out and also make reports annually to the government. With everything we are saying, at least from the discussion, I would still want to believe that, yes, engagement with the sectors is very critical, because with the sectors, you are able to know the effects and able to put things in place. If engagement, I will implore that the sector, maybe through man or whatever, should still try to engage the government, while the commission, in their carrying out their mandate, will look at the effects of these policies on businesses and the consumers.
She couldn't have given a better reply. An applause. In the early part of the recent administration, there was something called an executive order number 2 to the Nigerian ports. Some of you might have read a public report that spoke about the outcome of a study done. That almost 4 years after that executive order was passed, the conclusion of the report was that it was impossible to implement the executive order. Before I then give you a chance to have questions, I just said that to you so that you understand that when we're talking about the biggest risk to business, we say is regulation. But there is a bigger risk. is that the system does not seem to function as intended. Because if you therefore have an executive order drilling down, saying that all port reforms should take place, and nothing happened, we have a more serious issue that way. Maybe it hasn't sunk in, but in effect, you can pass your orders for all you care. We'll do what we want. It will be fair, before I throw the floor open, that we'll have the representative of the Action Aid, those who ensure that we're here talking, to share a few words with us. Madam.
I bring you greetings from Action Aid Nigeria, and I'm representing the country director, NLB. My name is Fumi Oyefusi, and I'm the Director of Organizational Effectiveness, Action Aid Nigeria. I'm particularly glad to be here for this conversation. It's my first in the series, but this is quite interesting because when the ban on the Forex came out, the first thing that we said in Action Aid is, how does this affect the poor, the people living in poverty and exclusion? They are already deep down there, so are we further impoverishing the people out there? One of the things that I've picked from Prof, it's about a national strategy. People say if you don't know where you're going, everywhere looks like it. So I feel in this country, we all believe that we don't know where we're going, so if it's this way we go, if it's the next way we go, it's important that we find out how do we move on from where we are? Since the point that the country gained independence, and this year we're going to be 59, I'm still struggling to find out what are we going to be celebrating on the 1st of October? Is it this ban? And are we ready to actually move on as a country? I was reading something about Russia, and I think we can relate with them. Even though it was as a result of the economic ban that was put on them, they also placed a ban on Forex of some of these agri products. But what did they do? They gave themselves time. It happened in 2014. They said, okay, by the end of 2017. And I think 2018, they extended it. And what I'm seeing again is they're extending till December 31st, 2019, which is 5 years. So it's agri products, but they gave themselves 5 years to implement the ban, to say that, okay, maybe we need to do something in-house to ensure that we are ready. But Nigeria will just come up. Maybe because we are also not engaging, or we are not engaging with the relevant stakeholders. So everybody comes up and everybody keeps quiet, and it affects all of us. I'd like to see a solution from this conversation, maybe a communique that we can put out there, and hopefully, maybe the relevant people will listen to us. But if we keep talking, one day they might just listen on some of the implications of these policies. Again, we have about 41 regulators in the country, the regulatory bodies. What's the quality of those regulatory bodies? And are they talking to themselves? There's one agency that we work with as Action Aid. And within the agency itself, there is no communication between the departments. We've submitted an information, and the other department says, no, we don't have your information. And I felt, so if within one agency, departments within the agency, there is no communication, then we're in serious trouble about the communication and the quality of the regulatory bodies. And that is why we would have a regulatory body picking up the responsibility of another one just simply because they are not up to the task. So for us, it's to look at the implications on the common man, the implications on the poor and the excluded of these foreign policies. Again, for us is to look at the quality of the regulatory bodies. Are you doing what you're supposed to do? And if you lack the capacity, can we get the capacity? It's not wrong for you to lack a capacity. We don't expect that everybody will be a monopoly of knowledge. But if we don't have in-house, can we also engage the people that have that capacity to support us in ensuring that, okay, this is the strategy for food importation, or this is the strategy we want to implement to ensure that by 20, God knows when, we want to be sufficient. And like one of the panelists said, if we're good at this, can we continue to be good at that and exchange that? Rather than just promulgate policies without engaging anybody, and we just feel that everybody would bow at whatever we do and move on. And then life continues. Again, we're enriching some people, and we're deepening the poverty in some aspects. So from this conversation, let's have a communique, let's have a conversation, let's have an agreement on the solution and put it out there. And again, the journalist would help us. What are the narratives out there? If the vice president can shout on the other end that, look, we dey lie for this country, then I imagine what the journalists have done to package that information to the entire citizens of the country that this is what is happening. So the journalists should help us with a narrative that would make the government to even listen. Help us with the narrative and partner with the people that are talking. Partner with the citizens, partner with the civil societies, partner with the private sector, and give us a narrative that is true and not the ones that will paint the image that all is well. I'm hopeful that at the end of today, we would have come up with a solution that would move the nation forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the kind words you said. I am aware, and I need to disclose it, that the business action against corruption will be undertaking what you call regulatory mapping to understand the number of regulators by each aspect. I think I'm aware that Muda, sometimes you did some action in respect to at the chambers, whereby you look at one particular value chain and you find a number of regulators that a person has to deal with. And you find out that over time, what we've done is we just put layers upon layers upon layers, and we have somehow frustrated the original intent. So that would be something I also look forward to, will be helpful. Second thing is that intentions at a sovereign level counts for little. The consequences is all that's important. And so it would be nice if we therefore, in exchanging conversations here, we can be as frank and as truthful with each other, because at the end of the day, we are the only stakeholders that matter in this whole game. It's not about his side or their side, and it's not about who is gaining an advantage, but it is about Nigeria at the end of the day.
So before I go to the floor, Professor would like to make some few remarks around the comments by the action aid. Please go ahead, sir.
Okay, well, I think it's wonderful to get this reaction and what we need to be doing. I think for too long, we have left the direction our country should be traveling to elected or unelected people in power. We are the citizens. The biggest problem with Nigeria is the failure of citizenship. And people have not begun to say, this is our space, you know. And these actions. Look, I wrote a book in 1990, published in 1998, titled Managing Uncertainty, Competition and Strategy in Emerging Economies. I was trying to take a model from structural economics, the so-called structure, conduct, performance, paradigm, and strategy. Most famous model of which is Michael Porter's famous 5 forces. And I was saying, look, you cannot predict outcome using that model in Nigeria. I told a specific example of a minister playing squash with somebody who had a particular game plan. It was vegetable oil. Again, almost like the story that Muslim told us about the flour. The person put the fear of God in this minister that could be a revolution tomorrow because of the price of vegetable oil. And the minister got to the president the next day, and Nigeria decided to unban the importation of vegetable oil. Now this person was playing squash with the minister, had a couple of shiploads of vegetable oil already at the edge of Nigerian waters. As soon as the government, without thinking, announced this unbanning of the importation of vegetable oil, his shiploads entered. Everybody raised ruckus and they banned it again. This man made out like a bandit. I actually gave this example talking last week in Kaduna to Kashim Ibrahim fellows that Nasir El-Rufai had put together. Because that man, that minister friend of mine, used to live in Kaduna. He's passed now. Look, this business is too important for citizens to look away. And we often abdicate. And let's take a logical example of this conversation we're having. We need to have more milk produced locally. Fantastic idea. Let's ban the importation of fuel into Nigeria. Seriously. I mean, I even have a better right. We have endowment in crude oil. Why should we be importing petrol? So, if the logic of this decision is right, let's ban the importation of petrol. Immediately, this night. If we are serious. Things have to be logical. And we must make logic a culture. The absence of rigor in the policy process is the reason Nigeria is often described as a recursive economy. 2 steps forwards, 4 steps backwards. And we just keep going like that. I think it's important that citizens take this up. I close with a small example, because journalists are part of the problem. Because of the level of their limited understanding. In 1995, the World Bank resident representative in Nigeria said to me, look, I can't understand what I read when I read Nigerian newspapers. It's not logical. It doesn't make sense. So between us in conversation, we decided to do a week-long workshop for economic, financial journalists. Well, it took place at the Gateway Hotel in Ota. Somebody came from the World Bank Institute in Washington, some Vietnamese guy, and myself and 1 or 2 people. We ran this week-long program. A couple of months later, Gerald Flood was his name. Flood calls me and says, my God, we've achieved a revolution. Nigerian newspapers are intelligent, you can read them. 1 year later, just before he left, he called me and said, what has happened? I told him, all those people that went to the program have become corporate affairs managers. They've gone. Now you have a new set of people who don't understand Jack, who are now reporting the world to us. There's work for everybody. What is at stake is far, far too big. Look, all these policy makers, all these regulators we're talking about, most of them, 90% are very good people. They're very good people, but they are not quite sure what they are doing because of so many limitations. In Nigeria, there is the dangerous alchemy of ignorance and arrogance. The more ignorant you are, the more arrogant you are. And this is what our problem is. So we need education.